how do we go about applying this rule of discipline within our organizational context, within some real life situations? Now, for those of you that have been through Police Dynamics Series 1, you're familiar with the dynamic of restoration. And in the dynamic of restoration, we identify the various stages involved as a person steps out from under the protection of their authorities and they get on this downward progression, this path of destruction that we call it. And there were several steps in this process. So you have the faithful officer, the faithful spirit that's under authority, protected, acting in harmony with the principles of his or her authorities. And then they take those first baby steps out from under authority. They develop an independent spirit. I don't need you telling me what to do. I'll make decisions for myself. I'll reserve those final decisions, and I don't care what you think or what you do, but I'm in this for me. And there's this attitude of self-centeredness, and it becomes an ego-driven mentality, and they take those first steps. That's the independent spirit. And then we talked about, as you try to restore them, how that person responds to that restoration will determine, are they restored? Do they go further down this path? And if they go further down the path, it leads to a wounded spirit. Person gets their feelings hurt all the time. They take offense at everything. Even a violation of the law can become a personal offense to this individual, and they get their feelings hurt over some of the silliest things, and there's always somebody else's fault. They can deflect the truth by assigning blame to others, and if they go around assigning blame to others long enough, that will lead to a bitter spirit. This person now just wants to get mad. They get mad about the least little thing. They stay mad. They're angry. They're embittered toward their authorities. They're embittered toward the organization. They're embittered toward their job. They're embittered toward the community, and it's a very dangerous place for officers to find themselves in. And then that leads to rebellious spirit. The rebellious spirit is no longer content to get mad. They want to get even, and they go on the offensive, seeking to undermine the authority of those that are over them. And then that leads to the unrestorable spirit that is so far down this path, they refuse to be restored outside of divine intervention. They're incapable of being restored. By definition, we need to separate ourselves from those individuals when it is legally possible for us to do so, realizing we don't always have that option, but when we do, we might want to consider taking advantage of it. So there's this downward step of progression of independent spirit, leads to a wounded spirit, leads to a bitter spirit, leads to a rebellious spirit, leads to an unrestorable spirit. And determining where your officer or where your team member is along this spectrum when applying discipline requires a great deal of discernment on your part, putting your supervision goggles on so you can see below the surface of the behavior. The behavior is the offense. Remember, the offense sets the range of options that are available to you. Could be narrow, could be wide, but there is a range of some description there. There is room for discretion within that range. And it's interesting that when you look at a typical model of progressive discipline within an organization, it fits very nicely within this path of destruction model of this downward progression. For example, an independent spirit could be restored very easily. Maybe all they need is counseling. You just need to have a very, low-key counseling session with them, and you can restore them gently and get them back under authority very, very quickly. Whereas a bitter spirit, somebody that has that, a wounded spirit has that tendency to be that grumbler, that fault finder, always, complaining about this, always blaming other people, never taking personal responsibility for their behavior, for their actions, for their offenses, which is the path of character, of course, is taking responsibility for your actions and your attitudes. But this person would not do that. This wounded spirit would not do that. If you understand and you discern their character to be that, then you might take a more aggressive stance within that range of options. That might require some type of a reprimand, perhaps a written or a reprimand to put into their file, for example. And then you've got the bitter spirit, the one that's just mad all the time because they're blaming everybody else for their problems. They deteriorate into a bitter spirit. This person may take more aggressive action yet. This person may need to have a suspension, for example, some time off without pay, to have a financial burden, or maybe some privilege removed from them, whether it be use of a vehicle or whatever it may be, whatever your policies allow. And then you've got the rebellious spirit that's always out there seeking to undermine authority. You may get more severe yet. assuming that demotion is within your range of options, that might be something that you would look at in an effort, a last-ditch effort to restore this rebellious spirit. And then the unrestorable spirit, we already talked about, whenever possible, we want to separate ourselves from them. So if termination is an option, based on your policy, based on the legal framework, then, and you really, really, truly have someone that is genuinely unrestorable. Again, you as a supervisor got to make that determination, and that's a hard one. I don't think there's that many of them out there. There are some. And if you truly have one of them working within your organization, and they have committed an offense that is serious enough to warrant termination within your range of options, then I suggest in that case, and that's an extreme case, in that case, you terminate that person's employment with the organization, because you just cannot have them working for you anymore, because the nature of the offense was such that termination was justified, and their character was such that that would be the choice within that range of options that you would choose. So you see that this model of this downward progression of the path of destruction, the independent spirit going all the way down to the unrestorable spirit, fits very nicely within a progressive model of discipline where you might have counseling, reprimands, suspensions, demotions, and terminations. Not to suggest that discipline within an organization is limited to just those options. You can get very, very creative with discipline, and I encourage you to do so within the context of your laws and policies. And I always have to make that disclaimer, because I realize we are limited by our policies and the laws, and we've got to be very, very sensitive to that and make sure that we're doing this in a way that is legally defensible. But that's the model, that's the principle, the rule of discipline, 2 parts, and how you would apply it to a progressive model of discipline. And then in the next video, I'm going to give you a real-life example within my own experience of how we applied this rule to a real-life situation and what some of the results were.